Okay, welcome to the first week of class. Oddly enough, this entire week is not going to be covering the contents of the textbook at all. This entire lecture is going to be on how to write a paper. So we're referring to this book, the optional book. And by the way, at the end of this lecture, you'll know whether or not you need to purchase the book or not. Okay? A lot of people can get away with just using the material that we provided, and you don't need to spend money on the book. But again, I'll let you decide that. Okay, so just as a reminder, this is a writing intensive course, and that the amount of writing in here in the course is kind of significant. I mean, we have 25 points, 25% of your grade is on your normal writing assignments and 10% for the term paper. So that's a lot. I mean, 35% of your grade, yeah, that's a lot. And I'm going to make some strange assumptions on what type of writing we're talking about. The type of writing that we want in this course is what you would do not for like a magazine or a web page. This type of writing is for scholarly journals. And scholarly journals is the way that the academic world works. Journals typically have some very strict submission rules. I mean, you have to have everything formatted exactly right, and you have to have all the rest of this stuff in place. And they get reviewed by an editor, and there'll be some back and forth between the editor and the author, and then finally, of course, things get published. Now, in order to get published, you actually have to do some real research. Very rarely can you have stuff published that's just a review. In other words, they don't, let's say, for example, that you say, well, I want to publish an article about the review of available, I don't know, credit card companies, okay? And all you did was just go to the credit card companies and gather their information and put together a review. No one's going to publish that in a scholarly journal because they don't want review. What they want is some original content. Okay, now original content is different. Original content means when I open your document and read your document, I'm supposed to be able to see something that does not already exist in the source documents. Okay? If everything in your document is just something that you copied out of or paraphrased out of a source document, that's no original content whatsoever. Okay? Okay, good. So, I'm expecting that your paper is going to be somewhere between 25 and 30% of the content is going to be original content. Okay? Everybody got it? Okay. And that means you can't just do a summary of what other people say. How many times have I said that? Okay. So let me give you an example of what we're talking about when it comes to original content. Let's say, for example, you guys are probably familiar with like Consumer Reports. They'll be doing a review of refrigerators or something. And a lot of their material is like they go to Frigidaire site or the Sears site or Maytag site, and they copy material to kind of fill in things. And so that part is okay, because then they go on and add original content. They go on and say, well, let's develop a rating criteria. And then they go through and say, well, now we tried this and this and this, but this one seems to have a larger freezer capacity than this one, and this one is noisier than that one. They actually produce content that you cannot find at the source. Okay? Whew. Okay. All right. So they start with other people's work, but then they add their own original content. Okay, good. All right. So scholarly journals tend to be very, very specific about references and citations. In the academic world, they spend an awful lot of energy making sure that everything is, the dots, I's, and T's crossed kind of things. So let's talk about that for a minute. How to make a reference or a citation. So, first of all, what's the difference between a reference and a citation? A reference is, at the end of your document, you list all the places that you went to go get stuff. And then a citation is physically where in the document that you refer to that thing that you referenced. So for example, let's say you went to a particular website and you found something, and then you referenced it 4 times. It would appear once in the references, but 4 separate times, okay, for citations. Cool? Okay. All right. Now, you don't have to cite everything, okay? It's perfectly okay for you to read a bunch of material and just kind of merge it in your head and come up with sentences that is a combination of 3 or 4 things. That's perfectly okay. You don't necessarily need a citation for that. So let's talk about what it is you do need a citation for. Well, you do need a citation when you have, when you're quoting like facts and figures and statistics. For example, if I said there were 1,800, bushels of corn, sold this year. Okay, that's kind of very specific, and somebody might say, where the heck did that come from? And so there should be a reference, it should be a citation that points to a reference so they could go see that themselves. Okay. Now, so again, research and references and citations, that combination, that's 30% of the grade, okay? 35% of the grade is original content on these papers, and 30% is you're being able to research those references and those citations, okay? Good. Okay, so let's talk about the format of the document for just a minute. Basically, there are 8 parts to this, and they go in a particular order, and you have to follow them exactly in the order in which I'm getting ready to tell you. Okay, so first is a title page. So one entire page of your document is just going to be the title. That's it, a title page. And then you're going to have an abstract page. And the abstract is kind of different. It's not really like a preview of coming attractions, not like a movie trailer. The way it works in the real world is that an awful lot of scholarly journals are not free, but they'll give you the abstract for free. And you can read the abstract and go, ooh, I want to pay money to get the actual document. Or you'd read the abstract and go, well, that's of no interest to me whatsoever. I'll skip that one. So you see what I'm saying? It's really supposed to have everything in there. It's supposed to be like a miniature condensed version of your entire document to include the conclusions. Don't hold anything back, okay? The idea is about 150 words, about, maybe a half or 3/4 of a page. Okay. So, wow, that's 2 pages already. Woohoo! A title page and an abstract page. Okay, then you get into an introduction. So the introduction is just how you start the document off. Every document has to start with some sort of an introduction. And we'll talk about how you format this in just a minute. And then there'll be a discussion. And some sort of a discussion about, what it is you're doing. And then you're going to probably have some sort of a conclusion or a summary, or perhaps a conclusion and a summary, both. Something that says, okay, now that I've given you all this information, here's what it actually means. Here's what I conclude. I conclude that the answer is 12, and therefore, blah, 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 blah. Okay, this part, the conclusions and the summary, is probably where you're going to get the vast majority of your original content. Not part of the discussion. There'll be some in the discussion because you may make some observations. For example, you may say, well, the manufacturer suggested that that this item is very quiet, but in practice it's not. It's actually louder than you might think. So you can make commentary inside the discussion, which is original content. But a lot of the original content is going to appear in the conclusion or the summary. Now, I just told you that I'm expecting that the original content to be around 25 to 30% of the bulk of of the document. I want 25 to 30% of that document. So your conclusions and your summary ought to be a pretty big chunk, right? It'll be about a quarter of the size of the document. So don't just go in there and make 2-3 paragraphs, okay? Okay. Then you're going to have references. And a reference is just a list of all the places that you went to go get your source material. Cool. And then you're going to have tables and figures. And when we get into the formatting discussion, this is unbelievably weird about how they want you to format these things. And it's probably like nothing you've ever seen before. It's kind of strange. All right. So let's talk about quoting and how to do references and citations. I mentioned before that not everything is quote worthy, but some things almost always are. If you quote a statistic or a particular fact, if you come in and say, well, there are 18,000 such and suches, then yeah, you're probably going to need a reference for that. But not everything is quote worthy. I mean, don't go overboard. I'm expecting somewhere, I'm making these numbers up, somewhere, I don't know, 2 to 5% of your document ought to be quotes. In other words, I don't want your document just to be filled with a quote after a quote after a quote after a quote. Because once again, I'm not really interested in reading other people's thoughts. I'm interested in reading your thoughts, okay? Okay. All right. A lot of people just flat don't understand what paraphrasing is all about. Paraphrasing is not taking a source document and kind of tweaking it, okay? That's not paraphrasing, okay? Not at all. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples of basically how to do paraphrasing. This is from a writing center of some other university. Okay, so I'm not expecting you to actually read this, but just kind of watch the screen. So here's how the original document appeared in the source. And here's where somebody just went through and just did a word-for-word copy of everything that was in there. I mean, they maybe made a few little tweaks and changes, okay? That's not paraphrasing. That's plagiarism. You've copied other people's words. Okay. So here's another one where they just kind of do cuts and pastes. For this particular case, now just because they give a citation, Chase 1995, referring to that reference, describes how nursing and critical care units, blah, 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 but they still copied and pasted bits and pieces of it. That's still plagiarism. That is not paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is when you go through and actually put everything in your words. Okay, now this is not a tough concept, but just bear with me for a minute. Every single word in the document that you write ought to be yours. The only exception is if you quote somebody and then you have to use their words, okay? So copying and pasting other people's words, don't do it. Read their words and then create your own words, okay? This is, like I said, this is not rocket surgery. You just kind of have to know how to do this. So I put this link in the lecture notes, and so you might be able to go back and find some more information. All right, let's talk about some more rules associated with writing a paper, which you probably won't find in the little blue book, because it's not really an APA formatting issue. It's just some other good ideas. The first is probably don't refer to yourself in the document. So, for example, don't say, well, I plan to answer this question or something like that. I have concluded. It would probably be better to use passive voice. By the way, some people some professors are absolutely nuts about active voice versus passive voice. And I'm actually suggesting that you use passive voice, which is kind of weird. So you would say instead things like, the paper concludes. Although that's technically not passive voice, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, personal pronoun. So the paper concludes rather than I conclude. And don't use future tense in your document. Don't say, I'll discuss this, or the paper will discuss this in, paragraph 4. Just go ahead and just say the paper discusses. Don't make it future tense. So passive voice is allowed. That's kind of weird, but okay. Please use a formal language. No slang, no jargon, no jokes. Okay, this is not the place to poke fun. Remember that the abstract is like a half a page miniature version of your entire document. Okay, so don't hold back. It's perfectly okay to have spoilers. Okay. No positional referencing. In your document, you can't say, look at the chart at the bottom, because you don't know where the chart is actually going to appear when it gets printed. Kind of weird, huh? Okay. This is probably a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark, and we'll pick this thing up again in just a few.